So I hope the dialogue taking place this morning has been a good moment for you. It's the last afternoon, and I will be sad in a way to end it. I'm very happy to be here with you. I'm sorry also to have given you just half of Tolstoy's text because it's so beautiful that I just realized I skipped the whole middle part, so sorry, really. It's really, it's worth going through the like 8 pages. And the Hegel's Tolstoy vis-a-vis that I will come a little bit, not too much, but into it now. It's more related maybe to the morning session than to what I wanted to talk about today as such being the risk. But in a way, no, because it's what does it mean to risk your life? This expression in French or in English to risking one's life or risking life itself. Why? What compelled me to write the book on risk was, I think, that we are today surrounded, not to say hassled, by the all the. It's not even a thinking. It's the laws of security, maximum security. In France, we called it zero risk, sort of new politics, sociologic, economic, probably at his most obligation. And this society of consuming of objects of desire and thought as well, of course, tells us constantly that we have to not only secure ourselves and the ones we are responsible of, but we have to desire that security. We're here really in a servitude volontaire, volunteer servitude, ideology. That's the closest I would say, because we're supposed to will it for our own good. And when you try to resist, to sign the Faustian Pact, they don't promise you eternal life, but almost. It's that at least you're going to live longer. You're going to not endanger. This idea of endangerment, the life of others, if not yours. And if you don't want to sign, then it's the next step is, okay, you may want to fuck up your life, but then what about the ones you care for? So you should just sign it. And it goes from very tiny, unimportant sort of, you're having an assurance for your, for your kids when they go to school or something. It's for your house, and it goes as far as reassurance for states themselves, and it piles up to the highest levels of our politics. So it's an intriguing sort of net, this ideology of security, of assurance, and also I think it's it gives us the idea that risk is hyperbolic. I mean, then if you want to risk, it means you're going to put your life in danger as surviving death. So you have the choice in between a heroic position that they will let you have if you, for some, heroes chosen, or it will be an insane attitude. But risk is not integrated as I would say, a normal path as life itself, as we were talking about spirit, this whole idea of spiritual exercise, that life is a sort of self-fulfillment towards knowledge and truth, or an idea of it, and that implies risk. So all this idea about to risk your life is to surmount death, is not, why would it be so? I mean, why life on the first place would be just a vis-a-vis of the death or the death drive? That's why Hegel will interrogate, and in his own way, Tolstoy responds. I would say Levinas too, but Levinas put us in a very far away, ethical, radical posture that is also untenable. You can't just stay in this Levinas posture where the other is seen as someone you are responsible for. Not only that, but you are to be his hostage in a way, and he or it will bear on you in a way that it will be like, he says, it's almost like a nightmarish return, and you should will that. So it's a very extreme position. Levinas was answering Buber, thought about reciprocal relationship, le je et le tu, the I and the you, and say no, it should never be reciprocal. So that makes a sign towards this morning discussion as well, towards asymmetry of the relationship. Is it forever asymmetrical, or can we build the ground of a common space through language and relation? So the spell of risk is really about what is being in life, être en vie. Is being in life just being born? Probably not. And I would say, to me, risking your life is not dying yet. It's integrating that you can be dying in your own life, and that being completely alive is a task. It's not at all a given thing. It's not just about being present to the world. It's being present to yourself in an intensive, reaching an intensity that is itself a sort of way of being reborn. Definitely not in the Bushian way, but in a personal sort of awareness. And this death coming into the life, the processes of life itself, is what Freud called the death drive. It's not really appropriate to put the death here, because it's like, wow, it's falling upon us like this world, this frightening world, and it's very difficult to name it otherwise, but it's like still water drive. It's the pulsion that brings all the erotic pulsion seeks the object and the satisfaction through the object. And as soon as it has got the object, it looks for another object. It's relancé. It's always renewed. And opposing to this erotic drive, libido, is to Freud is the death drive that tries, at first sympathetically, I would say, to just calm down the game, and says, okay, this overexcited seeking of objects of satisfaction, of the pulsion, the affect, is going to drive the self mad, the consciousness mad, because it's ever ending. So it would be like what we call the mania state in so-called bipolarity. So it's this maniac state. So the death drive comes to say, okay, let's just, metaphorically, we are not going to want anything, just pure calm, which looks like death. That would be the more alike the death state, or the we should also call it, I don't know, the chloroform anesthesia. The thing is, I think, and in one of his last texts, Freud, of course, he was was at the end of his life, suffering like hell, and having been put into exile was the Second World War. So he had really motives to be even more pessimistic than he already was, and he wrote a famous text saying, well, at the end I think that the death drive is more important than the libido, and it's going to overwin in ourselves. Not only this is why we die at the end, but this is why we miss our objects all the time, and the symptom takes over as a failure. The symptom heads to the failure of our desire, in a way. And he says also, it's interesting about what Avital said about the superego, is that the death drive can act as if it wanted to, like an overprotecting mother, like, just be quiet until there's nothing that's going to ever disturb anymore. And I think we could metaphorically put this in the question of risk, so as to say, the spell of risk is not only, putting yourself in front of the poker game, or saying, am I going to win this thing, or if I jump from this rock, am I going to stay alive at the end or not? But what is being alive in the sense of how is this death process in myself or in others working already, and how can we come at risk with that, and risk the being alive, the being really alive. And in this sort of ethical, maybe not, it's not an ethic, it's really a questioning path. I would, we encounter, I would say, negative capacity. Negative capacity would be a capacity of the being, and of the thought, of course, as well, to bring the usual negative objects as objects of desire, and the path that leads to them in another perspective. Like, for example, we briefly spoke about it, but the addiction, dependence question. What if we considered that being addicted and being dependent was a very important thing to risk? That is not only something that crushed upon you and just made you immense suffering, because it does. I mean, I'm not just saying, oh, yuppie, it's a very funny thing to go through. No, it's usually there are much suffering at stake with addiction or dependence. By dependence, I mean also all the realm of emotional states, of passions, or even by being driven by something you are addicted to, like it can be an intellectual passion, it can be any object. And what if we experience that the way to this intensity of life went through to the acceptance, and not only the acceptance, the going through again the experience of dependency, as willed, because, well, you could answer, well, if it's willed, then you're not so dependent, except that you can, as the Greek have well put that in tragedies, you can will something and then you have to surrender to it, because in the second movement then you're embarked into this affect. Because we come from dependency. It's not something just, why not make the experience? We come from there. We have been newborn totally dependent. What the scientific called neoten, you know how I don't know the translation of that. Neoten means that we are like unlike some animals, unfinished ones. We cannot just go out of the mother's belly and just jump out. We have to be protected and surrounded and spoken to in order to become humanized. And this moment in between the birth, or even before the birth, and just from the moment we are somehow autonomous, those first years of life are all about how can we cope with dependency. And it's interesting to see that in psychoanalysis, but also in the thinking task in philosophy, it's a very blind spot. It's something Mélanie Klein has gone back to this state a lot. But otherwise, I would say that it's quite difficult to have interesting texts, theoretical, about this dependency, because it's infra-linguistic, or at least it's the moment we acquire language, and the capacity of hearing the language, for example, and understanding it, and the capacity of restitution, of transmission, is not adequate. It doesn't coincide in that period. So you have a human being, let's say a newborn, that understands and is capable of listening to and make probably an idea of the world with much more ability than he can retransmit it or give his own signals of his need, of his so in many ways we just turn our back against this dependency. We forget about it, and we head with much impatience towards our sort of freedom. And this, when we are compelled to live again states of addiction or dependency, we are usually completely submerged by these territories where we both have known great intensity of probably of emotions, but at the same time no words, no discourse, no way to put a name on it. So, yes.
Oh, sorry, I just had to ask this question because as you're talking, I realized some of the consequences or significances of thinking about risk. And once I was asked by another artist to think, okay, what would happen if we didn't have economy? And it relates to what you're talking about, because I said, well, if we didn't have an economy, we would come up with some other system of value, right? So it would be based on cultural capital or other forms of value. And I said, so fundamentally, we would replicate the system. So the only way we could change economy or thinking about capitalism is to change the system of value. And all I could think was this idea of all or nothing is a phrase we use in English, but could we change the value to all and nothing? And the only place I could think of all and nothing working is when you have a family and you say, I will risk my life for them. It costs nothing, but it costs everything within the system of value. And so in terms of where risk really can be perhaps a kind of potential for us to mine, I think it really has a relationship to value in this way. And so it was the only scenario that I could think of to get rid of a kind of capitalist value or economy or some other kind of capital, whether it's based on money or other kinds of value. And risking one's life for someone else, which costs nothing but everything at the same time, it's like the value of all and nothing is really the only way I can see it happening. So there is something, I think, to risk that's very powerful.
No, yes, it's very important, and what you're saying, and also because we don't usually disconnect with the values we are in up to the neck and allow ourselves to think, what if, we would reverse the whole scenario effectively and think the other way. That's why I try to speak also in terms of negative capacity, which I don't think negative, as you see, but neither does Hegel when he speaks about negativity. It's a movement that maybe allows you to not only go through what you most fear, like in the phobic adventures, but to put name and words into something. That's maybe the only difference, is that when you are willing to understand from inside what can be the addiction or the dependency with the names with you, I would say almost as a poet, enabling yourself to name it, then you have like a magic, like the magic flute, or like an instrument with you that can. You're not going to tame the monsters. You're not going to not have fear, but at least you can. You know that there's the unsayable always down the ground. You can bring the fear or bring the dread to be named and to be addressed. And I think that makes the whole this whole movement. And philosophy is about naming concepts, but also naming what brings us to be related to those concepts. And that's why I was also speaking about the rejection of emotion and such, is that maybe we have to get a costume anew to think not only the construction of concepts, but ourselves in the screen and in the scene, being related to those concepts. And what does it do to us to think that way? What does it do to us to be in that society, for example, where security is a sort of unsaid ideology, well unsaid, sort of, and that is entering every field of your life without us really being able to say no, because confronted to that last issue, for example, of saving your family, then you say, okay, I surrender, this, I'm not going to risk that. So it's interesting to go up to this moment where the surrounding working concepts of the common world we are in are working up on us, and that we try to think them not as enemies or as adversaires, but confronting with them as objects, but also as something we are into. So that's the counter-transferential field Avital also was telling about. I could think of many negative capacities to tell you about. The other, for example, another could be the being lost. life is about being lost, willing to be lost. If you're willing to find your way, then what's it about finding your way? I mean, the question of being lost is comprised in the problematic of desire, of thinking. It's the aporetic way. If you don't, in a way, like I said, round back the camera and go back to the point where you don't know anymore what you... It's not about not knowing, we all know tons of stuff. It's about not knowing what you thought you know, and where you really thought were your more intimate and assured allies. That's maybe where the ground will go away. And can you sustain this? This is where you begin thinking, or else Aristotle's astonishment doesn't signify anything. If it's just about being surprised or being curious in a shallow way, then that's nothing, because we know how to do about that. We all our habit of thinking, and to put us in really an awareness to what is, for example, what does Heidegger all the time? What is thinking? What's the world? What's das Ding? If you don't go back to this point of stupor, almost to a death-life point of hesitation, then it means nothing thinking. It's just habit. It's just about doxa. And sometimes we don't, it's not that we don't demand ourselves enough, it's that we don't rewind enough to that point, because it's risky also. Because once you said, okay, I will remove these objects, I know I could be my ally or my repère, what are you going to find out? What if you're completely lost? What if nothing appears? Can be that too. It's not as if you were sure another light was going to come out and, oh, no, I knew the path was that way. No, you may well stay on the dark and just not know. But the interesting thing I could say about that being lost too is that if you take that risk, you don't risk depression, for example, strangely enough. This dark side is contrary to depression. When you rewind that way and you lost your landscape, you can find sorrow, you can find anxiety, you can find dizziness and vertigo and all this metaphorical same thing in thinking, for example. But you're not going to have depression. Depression is all about wanting at all price the stability. And contrary to all our desire of metamorphose, it's the superego saying, no, I know better than you do where the security is, and we're going to stick to that security. Believe me, it's better for you. And in that way, you're sure that one day or the other you will find depression. So it's interesting to see that the risk, the final risk, is maybe not where we think it is. In that sense. Do you have any?
I thought it was really interesting from a macro perspective to think about the 20th century as in Lacan's the four discourses, as the hysteric discourse, but he does not identify the obsessional neurosis as a discourse. But I think actually it would fit into the analyst discourse, insofar as it's always a approximation of determining what the other wants from me and so on. But at the same time, with this emergence of security state and the ubiquity of the security state, it almost feels like it's a kind of return to a university discourse where knowledge functions and power relations are diffused, and like he analyzed right after 68, that transfer from master to university. So I'm wondering how you might fit it within that particular seminar on the 4 discourses.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that the tricky thing about this all ensured, it's all comprised, you know, all ensured ideology. I'm not sure it's neither the master discourse or the university one, because both are the despotes, the host, the master law that announces itself as such and invites you to obey. I would say it's the mafia system. It obey its law, and then in exchange he will give you protection, knowledge, a place to be, and in that sort of exchange pact, you will be assured of quite a lot of stuff, you know. But you can always cut the contract and say, you know, I don't care. I'll go by myself, and of course there can be revenge, but you know where you stand in this, and that was also, you know, 68 and stuff, that university and what was the hysterical proposition in front of all this. For me, the tricky path, the tricky stuff here is that it's not, it acts as if it wasn't imposed, really. I mean, we're calling for it. It's like, well, it can, for example, in Europe, it's like you have new regulation and insurances in every step of your each one of your jobs. You know, you should have a table that's like that and stuff. And it's all about being insured in case of. And the in case of puts time very far. It's like, no, it's not going to change anything about your, or maybe a little stuff here and that. But imagine if there was a catastrophe. Oh, you will be so happy to find us in the end, you know, repaying you for what can happen. And this whole playing on time and fear, but at the same time denying it. We are going to do as if it was going to be totally catastrophic. And for this total catastrophe, you will have to pay a tiny little fee. So imagine the gain. You know, it's like a Pascalian game. What does it cost you in front if you think 2 minutes, but will only take 2 minutes of your time, to think about the huge catastrophe? Now just forget about this catastrophe, go on along, just forget about this, you know, nothing is going to be mainly changed in your life. That's what I call sort of Faustian pact. But I'm not a paranoid, you know, I mean, I don't think there's anybody that stands there as, you know, pulling the threads. No, I think it's us all. We're playing this game. So why? Why are we so eager to be relieved from this? What would be the risk that is not really even one? I mean, it's a real question.
So it's like an internalization of a superego injunction that can never be fulfilled with an invisible master that does not impose it, kind of idea.
Yes, but it's not. Yes, absolutely, it's internalized completely. But it's not as if you were addressing a master, saying, like the obsessional, you have to do that.
Right.
No, it's, you're free. You know, you can, of course you can risk the catastrophe and then just don't come crying. But I understand. It doesn't appear at all like a mandatory law. It appears like, well, just look at the proportions. You're going to sign. I mean, who would be fool enough not to sign? But it's a fool game here. There's something about the full game, because we are coming to see the effects of all this in what's going now in the States, in the depths, really. But we're not yet completely seeing it in our day-to-day life, and I think it's already staggering us. And to me, this depression, I don't want to do it non plus le mal du siècle, but I was telling you, so surprised that it comes so much. I mean, I have people from 14 to 81, so it's quite a wide range of people, and this depression sort of, I can't risk anything in my life because I've observed it all, and that's the best I can do. Aren't you agree? Thing? And just, okay, but then the desire is at loss. So I think it's all interconnected in ways that it's interesting for the philosopher, and not only the psychoanalyst that only works on day-to-day basis, to think the issue of such a debate.
Actually, in relationship to that, I feel that insurance, that kind of mentality works for words are broken, and I think there are more and more social norms that are broken, and so when you're very free, it's with a lot of pain. So freedom and extreme pain come very together, right? Which it almost seems like negative or reactive, and so I feel that might be one reason that pulls everyone. If everyone does it, that becomes a new web, and therefore you have to go on to forever. We definitely lose much more, and there's also, it's easier to inform of the things that one can lose. That's why the health insurance being privatized is a very strange idea, because it's not, the time component is not that big. Everyone does kind of annual checkups, so there's this thing. I'm actually in relationship to risk, risking thought. This is more a question, for instance, for a psychoanalyst, and the figures like the neurotic obsessive, the conversation we're having. How do you deal with those figures, for instance? For me, it seems that those figures come from a place that someone defined in a clinical way by either treating symptoms, or some other process of extraction, and that created those categories and ingredients. That's what I understood that they are. But at the same time, they do present it like this, not necessarily this conversation in general, as with a name and what it means. It feels, since it feels the negative of what it sounds, like many times the behavior, one looks for the antipode of the behavior, somehow to understand it better, somehow, like in a very quick way. It seems almost as if there is a clinical body that does it very well. There is not only that can't use philosophy tools only, it has to use a series of other tools. But then those tools, I wonder, how are they questioned? So, like, also, how many times do those figures get destroyed by the discipline itself in its search for? Since I'm saying it from the point of view of what I saw in the morning, which is those classes where the figures are not, they reference certain authors, but they are not taken only by the authors, but at the same time they're connecting these two fields where one's questioning too much everything that's a figure, and the other relies on figures that actually have or a certain complexity in the definition of the figure. So I wonder, for instance, how those bodies are created, and if they are subjected to that same kind of constant risking. I don't know if I'm making myself clear. So I guess my question is is the neurotic obsessive something very recent as a figure, or it has existed for a long time in the same way? And how was it defined? Was it defined by...
I think words, we have to name things, create also the things. So of course, in a way, the putting into diagnostic, for example, this névrose obsessionnelle is a way to create it as such. It's very difficult. it's as you were saying, can I relate to a concept before we had the name for this concept? It's it's the whole realist-nominalist really battle. But can we reach the object of thought without having to name it? But I think that, to me, for example, what I was saying about bipolarity is it's becoming our symptoma to name it so much into people and to get rid of the problem on, oh, I find it, that's bipolarity, oof, I know how to deal with that, and oh, my friend is bipolar, like it should be brown or blonde, or it's our symptoma today. It's one of, like maybe hysterics was in Vienna at this moment of the century with all the sexual issues and the bourgeoisie and it's interesting to me. The symptoma as such is an ally. I don't hear the symptom of a person. I mean by symptom something that can goes to insomnia, to very severe trauma shock. Symptom, of course, is very, but something that you bring up as, I'm suffering of this. Please cure me from this, or deliver me, or help me to overcome this thing. So I find that if you attack it as the patient is already usually doing, I mean, he's trying to attack this and saying, I will overcome as a soldier, to say it this morning, you probably won't do better than he already does, or worse, because you're going to come in the battleship with your own strategy. And the symptoma is very intelligent, because for me it's a creative issue. The symptoma is you have to make an alliance from the beginning to the symptoma, because to realize that it has been a creation and a compromise of the person from an unseen, unrevealed, unsayable scene to something that he can represent, he can name as his douleur, his suffering. So it's already a sort of miracle. Of course, it's a very heavy miracle. I mean, since you're suffering from it, nevertheless. So you have to do something about it, because if the person comes all the way to bring it to you, it's probably that he doesn't have strength enough to just deal with it. But how can you listen to the creative side of the symptom and bring it to be an ally of the person and not its enemy? And usually you find out where the real enemy is, and that's usually not the symptoma, but the secret loyalties that attach us to, I would say, very globally, the family records. Sometimes the family records recording themselves to the great history. But these loyalties are completely undermine what we think, how we relate to our family or whatever, our background, our infancy, and they usually build the symptoma as a defense, so that you, no matter what is your free will, your desire, you're going to obey that for which you have been born and willed to be. At least you have to sort of be torn in between this force of this struggle, this inner struggle. So it's to see that if you just diagnose someone saying, okay, he's a obsessional phobic stuff, and you just apply medication or even a psychoanalytic process, I think you just you're very confident with yourself and sometimes the patient too, but you don't really go somewhere, because Again, it's like when you think you're thinking, the surprise of the astonishment, and you're just in the realm of the doxa thing. So I'm going to try to go a little bit into the Hegel texts. Not that I want, by all means, to bring you into this stuff, but because in Lordship and Bondage, Hegel puts us to trial in an interesting way, that he exposed this figure of what is the issue of being alive, risking your life, for what? For what do we live? And the whole trick about this text is that he described the position of consciousness as if it was a person. Of course, it's a metaphor of a certain position of consciousness, but at the same time, it describes a frame, a metaphor of a real relationship between people. But you have always to sort of keep that on the background of your mind. For example, that he will speak about lordship and bondage and the master and the servant as persons, and it works that way. But at the same time, the next chapter will be about the unhappy consciousness, the consciousness de soi, and that's what's becoming of the master when he's left alone. So there's this double, well, I should say very multiple way of reading, and Hegel is definitely very difficult, so it's just going to be a very little hint about this. I'll just read some passage of this, and then I will try to not explain, but sort of frame it a little bit. So self-consciousness exists in and for itself when and by the fact that it so exists for another. That is, it exists only in being acknowledged. That's really we could just stop after this sentence. We are going to be able to die for acknowledgement, and it's for Hegel the only reason of living and dying is the self-recognition. You see, page. It's in this thing. It's 111. It's independence and dependence of self-consciousness, lordship and bondage. 178. 178. The notion of its unity in its duplication embraces many and varied meanings. Its moment, then, must on the one hand be held strictly apart, and on the other hand must, in this differentiation, at the same time also be taken and known as not distinct or in their opposite significance. The twofold significance of the distinct moments has in the nature of self-consciousness to be infinite, or directly the opposite of the determinated in which it is posited. The detailed exposition of the notion of this spiritual unity in its duplication will present itself with the process of recognition. Self-consciousness is faced by another self-consciousness. So he poses the scene, one and the other. It has come out of itself. This has twofold significance. First, it has lost itself, for it finds itself as another being. He really puts this movement of self-consciousness, like if he was putting the ralenti on a movie, something that's immediate. He puts it very, very, very slow, like saying you to just speak about self-consciousness, which we think it's evident. It's like, I know I'm me. He says, well, you first have to forget yourself, to think yourself as another, as a being, even as an object, and then re-enter yourself. He's pausing on that movement. And for it finds itself as another being. Secondly, in doing so, it has superseded the other, for it does not see the other as an essential being, but in the other sees its own self. It must supersede this otherness of itself. This is the supersession of the first ambiguity, and it is therefore itself a second ambiguity. First, it must proceed to supersede the other independent being in order thereby to become certain of itself as the essential being. Secondly, in so doing, it proceeds to supersede its own self, for this other is itself. So let's just pause. Is that the thing here is what is the negativity for Hegel? It's usually said that it's the movement of dialectic, and you know the obvious thesis, antithesis, superseded synthèse. But as for a human being, what it can be, because the real, for Hegel, I think the real truth of this dialectical movement is the spirit being born out of himself. I mean, it's the spirit realizing itself as the unity of being as a spirit. But in this moment, it has to reach life at a certain point. So it begins with. So the negativity is in fact a very constructive process of extracting your own potential being into the real, into reality, to put it at work, one would say, and then it can be superseded. So it's really a movement of acting out the potentially of living. It's not just about negation. If you just think of the negation, you're missing the point, because the negation in Hegel is the most active. It's a more active action. It's the moment when something is on the process of being worked on, métamorphosé, whatsoever. So I go to another place of the text, and I'm making a big gap. But the other is also a self-consciousness. That's where the problem begins. One individual is confronted by another individual. Appearing thus immediately on the scene, they are for one another like ordinary objects, independent shapes, individuals submerged in the being or immediacy of life. For the object, in its immediacy, is here determined as life. They are, for each other, shapes of consciousness which have not yet accomplished the movement of absolute abstraction, of rooting out all immediate being, and of being merely the purely negative being of self-identical consciousness. In other words, they have not as yet exposed themselves to each other in the form of pure being for self or as self-consciousness, just as being. And then, further in, he says, this presentation is a twofold action. Action on the part of the other and action on its own part. Insofar as it is the action of the other, each seeks the death of the other. But in doing so, the second kind of action of its own part, is also involved, the staking of its own life. Thus, the relation of the two self-conscious individuals is such that they prove themselves at each other through a life and death struggle. So, and just finish. They must engage in this struggle, for they must raise their certainty of being for themselves to truth, both in the case of the other and in their own case. So what he brings up here in terms of struggle is that those two self-consciousness in presence are going to strive for self-recognition, because they can only regain themselves through the recognition of the other. They cannot be autosufficient without the recognition of at least one another. But in this movement, the one who's able to not, I would put it that way, to not protect his life, but that is aiming at the truth, and is able to risk the death process, is the one that wins the mastery, who's the Lord, because it says that the price of this seeking of recognition is not even his own life. It would be life itself, or it would be truth. You understand? It means that in this process of wanting to be recognized, well, that's sort of humanizing the process, but in the seek of self-recognition, you are willing to let even your life. That means that self-recognition is more important than the life of the self. It's something here. It's not an. It's the place of the truth that's engaged. And the one that will, at the end, it's like in the James Dean movie with the cars, the one at the end that says, "Oh no, I stay in the ground. I protect my life." That's the servant. He leaves this struggle for recognition at the threshold of his own life. It won't be at the price of his own self. So the new situation emerging here is that the master has gained over the servant the recognition, and now that but the servant doesn't have gained this recognition. So the master is almost in the position of an object, because what the master, I'm doing a leap here, what the master has in fact lost when he gained this, he's the winner of no, let's say first how is the winner. He's the winner because he's going to ask the servant to mediate the relation to the object. That he's going to have the jouissance of the object through the servant. The servant is going to work and work on the object as long and propose it to the master. That is, the master will have a relation through reality and all the objects through the servant. But the real loss here, that and that's almost a pre-Marxist. That's a pre-Marxist Hegel. At least one can see how the path can be led here. Is that the minute the master wins this mastership on the moment of the struggle in between those two consciousness, that in the moment of the struggle they're in equality. The moment he wins, the other comes back to be an object, because as he's not able to sustain the struggle for and at the price of his life, how can I say it? He's not a worth. enemy anymore. You see what I mean? He sort of loses his place. He's not interesting anymore because he hasn't this quality of being able to risk his life. So he loses the only person who can recognize him. And the process that's going to come, and that's the return, is that the master is going to lose his mastery at the end because he has no one to confront to. And on the contrary, the slave is, through the working on the object and through the constant working on the real, is going to regain slowly by slowly the consciousness of his worth, without having to, he will be able to bypass the recognition of the master. But the master can't, because he has no way to relate to reality other than from the slave. He has enslaved himself to the relation, where the slave is free of this relationship. So, I don't know if I'm clear enough here, but of course, it's a text that has so much more foliage than what I'm.
Sorry, what is the object? Is it just what's happening right then?
The object is what is defining a relation, potential relation in between two consciousness, but also the power relationship is from the beginning of the relation, and it's also to him. That's the chapter that follows. The position of the master is the position of the unhappy consciousness in all of us, in a way. That is, for example, Stoicism and cynicism, where you don't want to know anything about the mundane life, the objects, and you're not working on them, and it's not worth it, and you just have your own conscious of the world, and you're tagged there. I mean, there's a whole analysis of how can the unhappy consciousness cannot go anywhere from where she stands alone as in a peak, sort of. And the text is interesting by many ways, but also because it interrogates this, saying that at the principle of the relationship there is hate. That's what there is the struggle for you want the dead of the other, not because you want the dead of the other. Of course, it's not a psychopathic way of seeing the psyche. It's just to say that you cannot, two consciousness in present cannot tolerate the same level of consciousness, and the movement of being conscious of yourself and of the self, the movement of the self is a movement of destructing what it at the same time calls for. It calls for the recognition, and at the same time it has to destroy, to reassure itself that it's superseding it all the time. And this figure has a whole history in our modern thinking. And I think that's what it's important to come back on it, because it's an analysis also of the relation to the other as in the form of the former struggle, and not as a possibility that the otherness is in a way so preceding yourself, so in a way beyond the procession of the self itself as such that it compels you in a complete other way than the struggle figure. Here you have the Kierkegaardian lecture. But that's what interests me also in this novel by Tolstoy, where you have a figure of a master, sort of a pure self-conscious figure of the master happy of his life and sort of both stupid and sympathetic and sure of all his prerogative. Master having to go for quite a long journey and preparing to say to quit the company and then preparing for this journey with his servant. So they take traîneau, how to say,
Sled.
and they go out in the night to this other city, and the snow begins to fall more and more and more, and the wolves make their operations on some place. And at first it's interesting because many times in Tolstoy things arrive as the death of the Ivan Ilyich as completely unseen, and it's like if the I would say the body itself of the tale, the text would try to not worry the reader too much, but at the same time put some hint of anxiety, but at the same time, no, it's just, it's always snowing at that period, and it's okay, and things begin to get worse and worse, but in a very, very slow, snowy way. And in the death of Ivan Ilyich, it's exactly the same pace. I don't know if you remember that he begins to feel ill but nobody knows why. It's just, it's tiredness, and then he goes to bed, and at first he just fell off a ladder, and what's the problem? And it's very, very slowly getting uncanny in a way, and this process of worrying is interesting because it's almost this process of what's happening, and you can't really think of what's happening. The reader has being as protected as the protagonist, and Tolstoy being as in the middle, saying, you shouldn't know too much, and to the protagonist, you shouldn't know too much of what's going to happen. And then the night unfolds, and they fall, and the sledge goes on the side, and then the horse is completely taken and dies too. And at the end, you have this figure of the servant that says completely, he has almost no clothes, very little, so it's never said, because Tolstoy refuses the psychological. It's very interesting that it's absolutely non-psychological literature, but it's all about saying it in another way, and the position is like an acceptance of death. He stays in his post, and he awaits the call to take him, while the master goes for help, and he tries to seek his way, and he goes round in circles, and then comes back and realizes that he's came back to the first point, and meanwhile the servant has put himself in the most protected space, but where of course he will have certain death. And you have this conversion, retournement, turning point, where the master at one point puts himself on the servant and saves his life by himself dying and being the protection and space of exposing himself to the cold, and realizing that at this moment there was a pure joy. That's the mystical side, I would say, of Tolstoy. That in those sentences you feel the turning point of the la conscience pour autrui. That's why I find it interesting that here the recognition, the process of recognition that's sought for, is coming on the way of giving your life to another, for another, and it's not coming, and it's unannounced as neither a sacrifice, neither something you're giving. It's only like it's very interesting when you follow step by step the way he writes it. It's like a fatality. He should do that, and it's pointless to think it otherwise. And then there comes the delivery of the conscience, and that's where he, in a way, recovers his maybe true mastership in this moment. So I found it interesting to, instead of opposing a Kierkegaardian sentence, to show that in how literature also could come in to go back to yesterday's final reflection, to go in the land of philosophy, not so much to bring any answer, but to bring up a figure that is questioning in another way the field, and questioning in a way that lets you not only decide but approach yourself, the field, or not, to stay aside and just look or interrogate others.
It's very interesting how Lacan will take up master-slave dialectic, because I think it's central to the creation of both the mirror stage and the Oedipal stage in form. But his is a much more catastrophic vision, insofar as, say, Kojève would create this notion that there is a dialectical synthesis that's possible between master-slave and a kind of relationship that can work. But Lacan actually kills the master and creates a system that will constantly go. Yeah, there's no, and I think it's by including death. So you say that Hegel has death in a central way here, but I don't know, is this true? I mean, or does he think that death can actually be something that's possible? And the other complication, of course, is that Lacan moves master-slave from work, physical work, which of course Marx appropriated, into language. So it even becomes another layer of complexity. So I don't know. But also, isn't it also for Lacan something that's absolutely like pre-Oedipal? So he takes this form and he takes it into something that's constituted in an incredibly structural way. Yeah. So
Yes.
I don't know if I have a question. I'm just sort of trying to think it through for myself. But it's really interesting how this has been co-opted and how it has been both the source of the negativity as a realization of freedom, but also as a kind of an impossibility for dialect. It's undialectizable, so to speak.
Just to let you, maybe you know about it, but the mirror stage he's talking about is the fact that, as it was said by Lacan and Dolto, in fact, is the fact that a child recognizes himself in the mirror, never alone, but because the mother or whoever takes him in his arm is looking at him in the mirror, And it's this triangular relation of the mother recognizing him in the mirror, makes him able to recognize himself. That's what's called the mirror stage. It's this archaic, metaphorical, triangular way, Hegelian access to the self via the look of the other, looking at in this movement of recognition. Just to
Does God play a role in this dialectic?
does
God play a role in this dialectic?
God's a real problem here with you know, as you know, the first Hegelian was very God included God a lot as such in his writing. And the second Hegelian, which is the Phenomenology of Spirit, Hegel, puts really the spirit, talks, c'est la vie de l'esprit. He doesn't refer to God, or he refers it as in a side way, I would say, but the vie de the life of spirit as emerging from all this dialectic and the history of humanity as such is really in the place of God, but a God that would be trained, ordained to go through the whole Hegelian process, obeying the rule. Maybe we can do a pause. Right.